Alright, so we're well into 2025 at this point, and in this video I've decided to take a look back over the history of smartphones and gather the ultimate top 10 list of the most well-reviewed smartphones of all time. And in no particular order, let's get into the list. The first phone I want to give mention to is an iPhone, and the one that's making this list is definitely the iPhone 4. The biggest upgrade that this phone made over its predecessor, the iPhone 3GS, was simply the design. This was a huge leap where we threw out the giant, fat, curved build and introduced this sleek, way thinner, boxy design, which to be honest has been carried over to smartphones that were released in 2024 as well. Phones like the iPhone 16s, Pixel 9 lineup, everyone realized the iPhone 4 was way ahead of its time. Aside from that, they obviously made other huge improvements like doubling the RAM, giving users HD video recording for the first time. But as big as those seem, this clean aluminium band surrounding a glass front and back was probably the highlight. Next up, I'm putting the OnePlus 7 Pro, where there's so much to talk about regarding why this was one of the most well-received smartphones, especially by the more enthusiast crowd. At the time, it was one of the few phones to have a 90Hz display, so it instantly felt smoother and faster than most other phones on the market. It had this really eye-catching nebula blue iconic colorway, which I somehow remembered the exact name of. There were definitely some things that were a little behind other flagships on the market, notably the cameras, but that barely mattered because for only around £650 here in the UK, you got probably one of the fastest Android phones on the market and a huge, pretty much bezel-less screen. Thanks to the pop-up camera, which was also pretty new at the time. I remember everyone being really skeptical in the early reviews of this phone, but OnePlus shattered everyone's expectations by meeting some crazy durability claims. The next spot I'm gonna give to the HTC One M7. Now, when this phone was released, I was like 7. And HTC phones in general had their time a while ago, when I definitely did not even have my first smartphone yet, but this phone was one of the best all-round phones of its time. And the main highlight here was this clean aluminium build all the way around. It had these symmetric bezels on the top and bottom, and it just made it feel like a really premium phone. I wouldn't even be that mad if a phone came out today looking like that. One of the most well-reviewed smartphones of all time, and I'm very glad this came out, even though I've never been able to hold one, because it very clearly influenced a lot of design choices that came after it. So next up, I'm going to go ahead and put the Google Pixel 2 on this list. I remember there was a period of time where the iPhone X had just come out, and people were still calling it the iPhone X, as people still do somehow. But there was also the Galaxy Note 8, which was doing really well at the time, the OnePlus 5T, and there was the Google Pixel 2, which was only the second Google-branded smartphone they had released. I remember a very old Unbox Therapy video at this point, released at the beginning of 2018, so 6 years ago, where they went around a room full of the biggest tech YouTubers and asked them which smartphone everyone was using, and an overwhelming number of them would pull out a Pixel 2 from their pocket, and everyone would pretty much give the exact same answer to the question of why, which was the cameras. The phone was iconic for having some of the best cameras in a smartphone for good reason. Google basically won everyone's attention with their software-dominant approach to their camera systems. Next is the first Samsung phone that I'm putting on this list, which is the Galaxy Mega. Honestly, this phone wasn't necessarily a general slam dunk when you look at it across all features, but the bravery to put a 6.3-inch display in a phone that people were carrying around in their pockets was impressive and also clearly stuck until today. This was also at a time where people were still calling big phones phablets, which is almost laughable looking at an average-sized phone today. So if we're putting phones on this list, considering the impact they've had on the smartphone market today, I think this phone deserves a spot. Next up at number 6, I'm just gonna put a fan favorite, the Motorola Razer, the first folding smartphone Motorola released. It was competing at the time with the Galaxy Z Flip, and I remember the Z Flip was pretty much better than the Motorola Razer in almost every way, but a lot of enthusiasts just kept saying how much they preferred the Razer just because of the nostalgia. I didn't get the hype because I never held an original Razer, but I'll put this phone on the list for the enthusiasts. Next up, I'm putting the ROG Phone 2, which I think really deserves this spot because it just pushed the boundaries of specs on paper to a pretty much world-class list of features, at least for the time and competition at which it got released. To be honest, most of these specs at this point seem pretty outdated, but you have to keep in mind that at the time, the competing flagships were like the iPhone 11 Pro, Snapdragon 855 Plus, 1080p, 120Hz, 8GB of RAM, 6000 mAh battery. These were all very gaming focused, intentional specs. But what everyone learned from the launch of this phone was that these specs all contributed to what felt like just a really fast, everyday phone if you wanted it to be. And then other companies start adopting these crazy specs like high refresh rates and huge batteries. So all of us customers won at the end of the day. Alright, at number 8 we have our next iPhone on the list, which is the iPhone X. And I get you might be wondering why this very imperfect phone is on the list, which is completely fair because it wasn't perfect. But when you put it next to the iPhone 8 that was released alongside it, this was a huge leap for Apple. Other companies like Samsung had already been pushing for smaller and smaller bezels in phones, but it became a pretty big deal because the everyday smartphone user was also now aware of what was possible, a phone that doesn't have two gigantic bezels on the top and bottom. It also brought Face ID for the first time. It was just a really fresh looking iPhone, which was very much needed after all of them looked pretty much the same since the first one was released, to be honest. My second last choice at number 9 might seem a little random, but I'm putting the OnePlus Open, which was very well received as one of the best, most refined folding phones out. It did things to make the folding experience not feel like a huge clunky thing. It was thinner than most other foldables, making it feel not far off from a regular slab phone in your pocket. Chances were that whatever review you clicked on about this phone had the words best folding phone. OnePlus did an amazing job with the software and actually tailoring it for the folding form factor so you can make the best use of the bigger screen. They also had significantly better battery life than other folding phones on the market, and it was priced decently well, just slightly lower than the Google and Samsung folding flagships at the time. And then at the 10th and final spot, I want to give mention finally to a Nokia phone, and it might not be what you're expecting, but it's the Nokia Lumia 1020. First of all, this was a Windows phone, which at this point going into 2025 is completely unheard of, but that wasn't a problem. Some people like that. The build quality was something everyone loved, and looking back, it very much does remind me of phones today. The back is kind of like a combination of new OnePlus phones with the really huge circular camera bump on the back, and that camera was something people loved. It was known for its massive megapixel count of 41 megapixels, which was crazy at the time. Now we all know the megapixels mean little when it comes to actual image quality and the look of the final software enhanced image that's produced, but this was actually one of the best camera systems in any phone at the time. So yeah, huge shout out to the Nokia Lumia 1020 for making huge strides in the camera and build quality departments. But yeah, that's about it for all the phones that I wanted to mention and put on this list. Let me know if you agree or disagree with any of the ones on this top 10. I'd love to hear what you guys think in the comments. Hope you guys enjoyed the video. Hit the subscribe button, drop a like, and I'll catch you guys in the next one.